Welcome to Voodoo Whiskey Gaming, and this is my late review of Paradise Lost. I played on the Xbox Series X. It's also available on the Xbox Series S, PS5, and PC. So let's get into the story. You play as a guy whose name I can't really pronounce because it's Polish. I think it's like Szymon. Like I said, don't quote me on that. I'm not going to say I could pronounce it correctly. As the game starts out, he had been living with his mother in what is kind of like this winter post-apocalyptic world is what it looks like. He goes and explores this bunker, which turns out to totally be a Nazi bunker, but it's like this crazy, like, post-apocalyptic, you're gonna survive everything vault tech kind of thing. And I'm gonna say, it actually really does seem like something that the Nazis would have definitely tried. But when you are in there and exploring around, you are looking for someone, and I'm not going to try and pronounce his name because I definitely don't think I can pull that off. But you get in radio contact with a girl named Eva, and the two of you start to build a friendship, and I'm going to say that's where everything goes downhill. Just based on a few of the documents I read throughout the game and meeting her, I knew exactly where this story was going pretty much in that moment. And I will say, I was right when I hit the ending. There was exactly one twist along the way that did kind of surprise me, but it really wasn't that interesting because it really didn't have a major effect on the story. It's a twist in something that happened in the history of the place that you are at, but really, like I said, doesn't apply to you now. And this is a story-centric game. It's a walking simulator, if you want to call it that, which I think that has never applied more, which I will get into later. So having a story that just didn't impress me, didn't really draw me in, that's not a good thing for a game where it's, you know, pretty much completely story-based. Now let's get into the audio, and I'm going to praise the sound design of this game. I think that was really well done. The sound effects in this place are fantastic. I was especially impressed with the footsteps, which I know that may sound silly, but they're really well done. On all the different surfaces you walk on throughout this game, there are different sound effects for the footsteps. And they will echo off the walls, and it's really well done. There was a point where I stepped on like crumpled up paper, and it sounded like stepping on crumpled up paper. Which may sound dumb, but in a game where it really is a lot of walking around, that kind of sound design is impressive. There's also sections where you're hearing speakers, specifically Eva speaking through speakers, and they do a good job of making them like sound like they're coming from these speakers that could be to the left, to the right, above, behind, in front, everywhere. I think they did an amazing job with that sound design. Unfortunately, the dialogue being delivered is, oof, wow. I mean, it's pretty poorly written dialogue. I think it's mostly a translation issue because there's a lot of stuff that's in German and Polish in this game, so I think it's really translating that stuff that maybe fell flat. But on top of falling flat, a lot of the voiceover is pretty not good. Honestly, at its best, the voiceover work is not good. There is some voiceover work that is really, really bad, though, at certain points. One of the characters, a character whose name I will not try to pronounce, the voiceover work for that character is super bad. As for the music, there's a bit of music, not a ton, and when it is there, it's not super noticeable or memorable, so meh. But let's get into the gameplay mechanics and whatnot, and like I said earlier, story-driven walking simulator, and as I said earlier, that title really truly does apply to this game, because you literally walk everywhere, and there is a button to sprint, I guess. But it's not sprinting. Like, your normal moving speed is about 5 times slower than the normal human moving speed. People moving that speed are not healthy human beings, to put it simply. But when you hold down the button to sprint, you move at not even still a normal human walking speed. So it's really kind of obnoxious, and it feels like they did that to pad out the length of the story. Because in reality, it's not a long story. Like, beating this game takes 3, maybe 4 hours, and honestly, so much of that is due to the fact that everything moves so slowly. That being said, it's a lot about exploration. You can find a lot of documents to read and find out what happened when the bunker was controlled by the Nazis, as well as when later it was controlled by this Polish group. And so I think that is very interesting. There are also recordings. You get to experience a lot wandering around and exploring, so I thought that was cool. But like I said, the movement is just, it gets painful and it gets frustrating, honestly. Also, it's not like there's really any puzzles to find or solve in this game, so there's not even like a slightly mental element to it, as well as you don't really do a lot of decision making. I mean, you can do some things, but I never felt like they had any real effect on anything. The only thing that really affects the ending is the decision at the very end, or at least that was my experience. Now let's get into the controls, and as I said, the movement is incredibly slow in this game, and you know, the controls are okay, they're not super responsive, but they are super weird in that I am an inverted person, so when I do anything first person, anything camera related, I invert it. The weird part is, the way you interact with a lot of things involves you holding the right trigger and then using the right stick. Inverting the camera makes that invert for those interactions. So that is just weird and garbage and doesn't make sense, and it's really obnoxious, and you do get used to it, but it's still stupid. But let's get into the visuals, and this is one of those weird parts for the game. I'm gonna first off saying certain like environmental elements, like when there's snow or water, they look like shit. They do look terrible for some reason. Also, the hands don't look great. They look really weird, and I've never seen a human being hold an item the way this character holds an item to examine it. I mean, it's just not a thing that humans do, and it's almost, again, I've used this before, it's like somebody who has never, like, seen or heard of human hands, and then they're trying to make a game with human hands. But that being said, I will say, like, the design of the bunker is insane. It's really cool. It's this massive cavern with these massive buildings, and the architecture and the design, it's just really fascinating and really interesting and really well done. I've got to admit, I was truly impressed by that, and I do think they actually, in like the buildings and that kind of stuff, they put a good amount of detail into that. Not just into the visual element itself of like, does that look like wood? Does that look like a desk, etc., but like making it feel like a real world, like feel like people had lived there. I was really impressed with that design element. I think they did a great job with that, which is kind of weird, but they did also make it do a good job of seeming like this was a place that the Nazis would have built for some weird experiment type thing, and that is exactly what it is, and they did a great job with it, and I was just impressed visually with that element. But now let's get into some of the more negative visual things. There was an area where I was in, and there were like these bunk beds, and the pillows were just floating in the air. That's not how gravity works. But then there was this weird moment where like these black squares started popping up and flashing on my screen, and they would not go away, and I just had to suffer through this experience in this portion of the game so that I could keep going forward, and finally it stopped, but man, it was not okay, and I'm pretty sure if someone was epileptic, they would have a seizure from it. But that was just not okay, and it was weird and horrible. It hurt my brain and eyes. But let's get on with it. Let's get on to the next step, which is also the final weird glitch I ran into, where my character started floating and I couldn't interact with objects, and I started clipping through things, and I had to reload the final checkpoint, which turns out didn't unfuck the situation, and it continued. I had to actually close out the entire game, reload that checkpoint, and then it finally was unfucked. But the problem being that never should happen to begin with, and it was right at the ending, and it forced me to suffer through the same section 3 times, but that section also has some of the worst voice acting in the game. It's legitimately horrible, and that's why I say suffer through that section. Also, there's a weird glitch where if you hit the Xbox button, it pauses the game, but it doesn't really pause the game, which that's annoying and weird. Shit will still go on even though the game is supposedly paused. Also, if you have paused the game and then hit the Xbox button, it will unpause your game. Yet when you hit the Xbox button, it doesn't really pause your game despite claiming it's paused your game. So I don't know. But let's just get into the wrap up on this game. I didn't really enjoy it. With a story as predictable as it was, it was really disappointing to me, especially in the sense of a game that is completely driven by story, no gameplay to be driven by. And then just feeling like it was really padded out, it started to feel like a chore to get through it with how slow the movement was, and there were other movement related sections like paddling a boat at one point that just dragged on and on and on. And the weird thing is, like, when I googled this game, there was a thing that said this has like a 7 out of 10 on Steam or something like that, and then I looked at the Metacritic score, which occasionally I will look at the scores if I'm super curious, and the critic scores are 6 out of 10-ish, 60 on Metacritic, you know, but the user scores are 8 out of 10, and I'm just sitting there going, no. I absolutely would not give this that good of a score. It was insufferable getting through it. I mean, some of the things there could have been really cool, but there's just not enough of it. It's a short story that is padded out by overly slow movement, and by the time it's all said and done, it was a fairly cheap game, and God, it was way too much money. If this game was free, I still wouldn't recommend it. I did not enjoy it. It's not worth the financial investment or the time investment. Go play something better. Okay, so in the comments down below, why don't you tell me, have you seen Zack Snyder's cut of Justice League? Because I have, and I gotta say, wow. And that's a good wow, by the way. I was really impressed by it, but I am also saddened by what could have been, and we will now not see in the future. As always, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button, and if you like what I'm doing in general, share and subscribe. Have a good one.